Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for today's Caseware webinar. Today, we are looking at custom reports. That's in the Accounts Advanced templates. And if we just jump to the next slide, just a couple of introductions. So my name is Tom Jeffrey. I'm one of the Education and Media Technicians at Caseware UK. I'm going to be monitoring the session today, making sure everything runs smoothly, and also keeping an eye out for your questions. And we'll go through some housekeeping in a moment for how you can submit your questions. I'm joined by Phil Reeves, Education Media Consultant, and Phil's going to be taking you through the content and also be on hand to answer your questions. As we can see, we've got some housekeeping here. So to submit a question, use the Q&A option there. Slightly different on mobile if you're on a mobile device. Thank you, Phil, but on the Zoom platform, just use the Q&A there and submit your question. We'll do our best to answer it live during the session. We've also allocated some time for Q&A at the end. And if we don't get back to you live, we'll do so directly afterwards. And we'll also pop the question on a Q&A document on our help site. So we are recording the session. That recording will go onto the help site and also onto our YouTube channel. And a Q&A document of any questions will accompany the recording on the help site. And we'll signpost those for you after the session. You'll receive a notification for the recording and any accompanying material, including some useful links, which we'll be providing through a handout. That's the housekeeping out of the way. I'll hand over to Phil and we'll get started with the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Tom. And yeah, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. As Tom has mentioned, today we'll be looking at custom reports. You can see the agenda on the screen. So we'll be going through initially creating and customizing a report, and then essentially how you get that into your Caseware file. And then quite importantly, distributing that amongst your colleagues. So obviously when we produce these reports, the idea is that they'll be applied into multiple sets of financial statements. So we need to make sure we're aware of where to go to and how to get that across to other members of the team. Obviously, we do invite any questions that you do have, so please feel free to chuck those into the Q&A. And then we'll make time for those questions as we go through, or obviously if it's relevant to a certain section, I'll always invite Tom to jump in and just ask that question if we are mid-flow in the webinar, which is, again, the more questions, the better it is for myself and Tom. Now, before we actually look into creating the custom report, it's important to make sure that we're aware of where the actual templates that we would use for those reports are saved. So there are two separate locations where we would find the custom report templates. So there's the Accounts Advanced for FRS 101, 102, 105, which will be found within the APP4 folder of the path that you can see below. So it's C drive, program files 86, Caseware, resources, knowledge library, and then APP4. That's accounts production. I think it's account production process 4, but no one really needs to be aware of that, just APP4. IFRS template, the only real difference, that last folder, as you can see, is IFRS. It is important that you do use the right custom documents. So we're referring to potentially a custom accountant's report or a custom audit report. We want to make sure that we do use, if we're creating IFRS sets of accounts, the IFRS version, and for FRS 101, FRS 102 or FRS 105, that we are using the version saved into that APP4 folder. Mainly it's to do with scripting. Scripting is slightly different between the two documents and how that information filters into the report, hence why we've got two separate versions. Now, if I open up my File Explorer, we can see the folders that I was referring to. So we've got APP4 here, APP4 being the one for the Accounts Advanced template. And you should see, again, these folders are in alphabetical order, but you'll see an option here, a Corp AC report custom for the accountant's report, Corp Aud report custom for the custom audit report. A little bit easier to find for the IFRS template, because when we go to IFRS, it is the very first document that you'll see in that folder path. So just making sure, again, that we go to the right option when we are starting to create any of these custom reports. What you would need to do as a first step for creating these reports is just take a copy of this document. You don't want to open the custom version, because as again, this is a template. We want to start off essentially with a template, but we want to customize it. We want to create our own audit report off of that template. And if we went in and just started changing the template, then in the future, if we needed a different audit report, we changed auditors, or we're doing different audit reports depending on, we got different auditors for different sets of accounts that we're working on. If we went through and started customizing this, we'd have to base all of our other audit reports initially off of the audit report that we've then gone through and changed. So we take a copy of this, and to ensure that it goes into the financial statements, the first and important step that we need to do is take a copy of that and put it into our custom folder. So in program files 86, Caseware, resources, knowledge library, custom, again, that path appearing at the top of the screen. We just want to paste in a copy of that custom report. And if you want to, you can rename that report. So again, if you're going to, it could potentially be that you are creating more than one custom report for different sets of accounts. You want to be able to distinguish between them. So we can go to rename file, and we can go through and we can give it a name accordingly. We can then open that and start to populate our custom report. So I've just called it webinar custom report. You might call it the name of the auditors that you're working on. Don't necessarily need the word report in there at all. Caseware, when you go through and you build it into the accounts, will be aware based on the scripting that this is a custom report. But again, more for your own referencing, because again, you're going to need to know exactly which one to select. When we double click on this, it'll open up our custom template report. So the copy of the template that we've used, there's not going to be a great deal of information in here. Let me just double click on that again. And what we will receive is a message here that will ask us to take knowledge library updates in the document. So you'll receive this every time. The initial document, the initial template that we're working on has, or is the same, really the same sort of document and style and options as we had when we initially created this document way back in the day. So we'll always be asked to take updates to the freeze and custom cells. So we click OK to that, and we will then open up our report. So you'll see some of the old school question mark icons differ slightly from the standard ones, but again, all work in exactly the same way. But just something to be aware of, the document will ask us to take updates when we first create it. Now, as you can see, not a lot of information in our starting point for our custom audit report. There is a little bit of narrative that's available to us when we're creating our report, talking about styles. Those styles are very important to make sure that the information and the look of the document is appearing in exactly the way that we want it to. Before you start to edit it or start to build in your own audit report or accountant's report, if you're working on the accountant's report document, we would always say just have a quick read of this, input in a heading, style using, and again, it's talking specifically about styles and also about custom cells. So we're going to be looking at some of these options as we go through today's webinar. An important thing I want to touch upon is just this section below where we've got space, and then we've got all of these hard returns here. One important aspect whenever creating a custom report is that we do not delete these areas. These will contain the signature section at the bottom of our custom audit report, which will populate directly from the wizard. So when we go through in the wizard, we go to our auditors section, and we go through and we type in who the auditors are and what their address is and who the senior statutory auditor is. All of that information that we provide within that section of the wizard will automatically transfer onto our custom report as and when we go through and build it. So it is important that we leave this section here. The rest of it we can remove. Now, before you do any work, I would always suggest that you expand this area on the left-hand side. So this area here, because it will inform us as to exactly which style we're applying to each section of our report as and when we go through and build it. And the styles, as I said, are very important to make sure that we pull through the document looking in the way that we want it to. So the headings are bold, the rest of the text is just standard text in standard formats. You know, we can go through and create our own styles if we need to, and we can also adjust the styles as we put them into the document. Now, if you want to, you can go through and delete that text. One thing I would always suggest that we do is just select at the end of that last paragraph, press enter a few times. Give us a bit of space to work in for our audit report. You can see the style here is text standard input. For anyone who's used the accounts, as I hope you have before, the template, that is just those standard green text sections that you get within the financial statements. So the ones where you can insert your own text within the accounts. What we're creating here is essentially just some input text lines that we're going to input, or that we could input and adjust our text on within the financial statements. But now we put the space in. This is going to be like our working area. We would remove this text here because we're not going to want that at the top of our audit report. And then it's always important to make sure you remove this normal line that you get when you do delete that content. Just press delete on there. Now, to get your content in, it is as easy as going to a Word document, or, you know, if you've got it in PDF, and taking a copy of that content and just pasting it into the Caseware software. Now, first thing you'll notice when you do that, Caseware picks up the font styles of the Word document in Caseware. So it does appear as though, you know, the heading is bold and that the text is standard and that we've got our bullet points in there. Obviously slightly larger than what we'd usually see on Caseware, but it is important to be aware that if we did build this into a set of financial statements at this point, that heading would not be bold. The bullet points that we've got here would not be included. The text would appear in the text in the middle where we have audited the financial statements of Elsham, etc. That information would pull through in the way that we want it to. But the reason why the heading wouldn't pull through in bold, and the reason why the bullet points wouldn't pull through, is because from a heading perspective, the style, if you remember I said about the styles, always look at the styles on the left-hand side. The style there is text standard input, which, as I just mentioned, is that green input text area that we get in the accounts. It isn't a bold heading that we would usually use within the financial statements. That would usually be a text subheading style. So even though it looks in this document, and this can often catch people out when they're creating these reports, even though it looks in this document as though we are using the correct styles, have a look at this left-hand side, because you'll often find that it's not actually the style that you need for that particular line. So always go through, first step, once you've copied the content in, and check the styles. You want the styles to be correct. This here, our heading, we want to be a text subhead. We want it to be a subheading. We want it to be bold in the accounts, so it follows the rest of the layouts of the financial statements. So what we can do is we can go to the Home tab on the toolbar, and from here we can adjust the styles. We've got text standard input, so it will tell us in this area here in the style section, and I'm currently highlighting or circling, it will tell us the style that is currently being picked up on this line. So as I said, for any headings, we want that to be the text subhead style. You have two options. You have text subhead, or you have text subhead input. So again, obviously the clear difference between those is that the input one will allow you to overtype it on the face of the financial statements. So we go to the drop down and we can select text subhead, and you can see the style has changed. Also, the layout of the style has changed because it's gone now to the standard disclosure layout or size of the text, that we'd have within the Caseware software. So that's the first thing, making sure that your styles are correct. With this text, you have two options. You can leave it as text standard input if you want to be able to have the ability to overtype it on the face of the accounts, or if you want to lock this text, you can go through and you could change the style of this to be text standard, STD for standard, STD input for the input style. You'll notice that if I switch this to text standard, what I want you to just quickly do, keep an eye on this left-hand side. So very faintly, I know, but you can see a blue line, and then off of that, it's like a sort of purpley line alongside that. Now, anytime you see a purple line on that left-hand side, it's telling us that that is an input area. But if I switch this to be text standard, you'll see that that purple line, the one that it's a little bit easier to distinguish now, because in this section here, we don't have that same purple line that we had there. So again, anywhere you see that purple line, input, anywhere you don't see it, it will not be an input section. So we probably don't want that area to be input as well. So we've changed that to text standard. Ultimately, it's up to you. There's not a great deal of difference. If you have text standard input, it means you can overtype the text on the face of the financial statements. If you don't, it means you can't. We can highlight a section of text as well, and we can change the style of that as well if we need to. But that is the first thing to be aware of. We need to make sure that we do select the right styles on each section of our report. Again, copying the text in is easy. We just do it from Word. The next thing to be aware of is the bullet points. So Caseware has built into the software a certain bullet point indent that differs from the bullet points that you would receive within Word. And what you want to do, if you ever copy any text in from Word and PDF, and that piece of text you copy contains a bullet point, just remove it and make sure you're building in the right styles and bullet points that Caseware contains. Now, the way to check it is always to go to the home button. And this is an important point. And again, it's covered within the handout that Tom is going to make available in our Getting Started guide for custom reports. But it does, and this is a critical point, that we do not want to select the bullet point button. Now, the reason for that is that the bullet point button copies the bullet points that already exist within the file. And we've copied the other bullet points that are in this file from Word. So Caseware in the background, in the scripting, is remembering the style of the bullet point from Word. But as we just mentioned, that style of bullet point differs from the style that Caseware contains within its bullet points. So don't select the bullets button. Always go to the multi-level list button, where we can customize the bullet points that we're using, because then we can update the style of that bullet point to match to what we're having within Caseware. So we click on this button here, we go to bullets. And the thing to look out for, and this will depend on whether you're using imperial or metric units within the installation of the software. But for those that, hopefully we've stuck with the default and we're using the inches method that we can see here. So 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, 5 across the page. The text indent for a bullet point should be 0.40. You can see before it was 0.25, which is the indent of the bullet point that you get when you copy the text from Word. That's something that we need to be aware of. We need to make sure that when we go to multi-level list, we select bullets and we put the right indent in. We then press apply, and you can see quite clearly on this screen now the difference between a Caseware bullet point and a standard bullet point that's provided by Word. The main reason we're doing this is just to ensure consistency with the areas, the standard areas of the financial statements that also have bullet points in them. We're talking directors' responsibilities, could potentially be looking at some areas of the accounting policies that would have bullet points in them as well. They will have the same indent that we can see on this Caseware file now. Now you could go through and you could apply multi-level list onto this as well. But to get additional bullet points in is as easy as backspace to remove the existing one, backspace again, so that that bullet point appears as part of the existing bullet point that we've already created, and then just press enter. And you can see it copies the properties of that first bullet point into now our second bullet point. So for this one, backspace, backspace again, enter, and then we get our third bullet point in there. You don't need to keep going back to multi-level list once you've done it the first time. Just backspacing, and then pressing enter. These are all segregated as separate bullet points because of the fact that we have separated them by pressing enter on this mode with a hard return. The other thing you may find is that you get an instance where it looks like this. If you see the arrow icon that you can now see against and, so just to the left of this word, or right, sorry, of this word and, there's an arrow icon. That is a continuation of the existing bullet point. So if you see that, you just need to, again, backspace, press enter, and then you'll get your own separate bullet point in. The final thing to be aware of and to consider when you're creating your custom report and customizing it is the information that will automatically flow through from other areas of the accounts, name of the company, year-end date, information that is going to change depending on the type or the set of accounts we're putting this file into. So what we can do is we can create cells within our document to pull some of this information in automatically. Now, this is where the question mark icon at the top comes into play. We can select the question mark icon, and here it says that we can view a selection of sample cells to copy where live references are desired. The Caseware has got some predetermined examples of cell numbers that we can use to populate things like the client name, to populate things like the year-end date. Now, the reason why these are pulling through as the 1st of March 1900, and there's no name, is because I haven't opened up this document within a Caseware file. If I'd opened it within a Caseware file, then it would have pulled through some examples of display names, but you can guarantee this will pull through when we get it into the document. So if I need a cell for the name of the company, I just copy this cell number that we've got here. So I take a copy of that. We can create a cell by going to the insert button on the toolbar and going to the cell option, or as you can see there in the shortcut, Control and L. And again, this is all about future proofing and also making the document applicable to multiple sets of accounts. So by populating the name of the company and the year-end date automatically, we don't have to keep going through and making sure that's correct on each file that we're going to use this report in. So when we create our cell, it asks us to insert a cell number, and we copy our cell number, which is quite nicely still highlighted behind this screen, and we place that into our cell number. We click OK. We click OK again to the message that says that the new cell will copy the existing properties, i.e. what the properties of that cell that we've got within Caseware is copied, and that will pull through the name of the company. Again, you'll have to trust me. We'll see it when we get and build it into the financial statements. But we've got a cell now here for the name of the company. Another example we can do for the date, the year-end date, we can pull through automatically as well. So again, that's this example here. We take a copy of that. We go through, we create our cell, Control and L for a shortcut. We paste in the cell number. We click OK. We click OK, and we click OK, and we get our date pulling through. If we need that cell again, we just repeat the process. We paste in our cell number, which again is cust CY for current year end, and then we paste that in. So those are the key areas to look out for, making sure that one, we have got cells in there to pull through the information we're automatically populating. Two, that we've got the bullet points in the right styles. And three, and probably most importantly in terms of the look of the document, that the styles pull through in the way that we want them to, i.e. we've got the right heading styles, the right text styles if we need them. Now, what we do from this stage, and obviously we'd copy in and we'd go through and we'd adjust the rest of this report, but for now we're just going to save it. We say yes to this. If you do appear with any messages, and then we close the document. Now, that document is saved, as we saw, into our C drive program files 86 Caseware Resources Knowledge Library Custom. Now, to get it into a Caseware file, we first need to add it to our computer settings. And the reason for that is just to make sure that it's available across any file that we are working on. We don't have to keep loading it in on each file. We want it to be available across any file that we are looking at within Accounts Advanced. So we go to the other docs drop down within the digital dashboard, and we go to computer settings. If you are working on a file that is an audit file where accounts have been built in and you want a custom audit report, the digital dashboard obviously won't be available because you'll have the audit dashboard appearing instead. All you need to do, you can see the name of this document is comp set. So just go into here and type in the search function, type in comp set, and that'll open up the computer settings document. Now, once you're in the computer settings, you want to go and say that you've got a custom audit report available. So you trigger this to say on, and then you simply need to search for that report. So you click here and you search for the report. So we go to the C drive, we go to Program Files 86, we go to Caseware, and again, remembering that path, resources, knowledge library, and custom. And in there, we will have our audit report. So we can load in, as you can see, additional audit reports if we're creating more than one. If you've got one that's going to be loaded in to all, if we're just creating one and we want to load it into all of our files as a default, and the default library file going forward, we can tick the box on the left-hand side. That'll make it, or put the arrow in, I should say, and that'll make it the default report going forward. So we load that in, we set it as the default if we want to, and then we close the document. Now we can go through and we can build that into our financial statements. So I'm just going to load the accounts. Whilst those accounts load up, just as a pointer, if we need to distribute this amongst other members of the team, all we need to do is come into the library file path, the C drive, Program Files 86, Caseware, Resources, Knowledge Library, and Custom, take a copy of this document and send it to other users, i.e. put it on a shared drive where they can access it, and then they would need to place it into the same location on their installation of Caseware. So within the C drive, Program Files 86, Caseware, etc. You've got the idea of the path. So I would take a copy of this, send it to Tom. Tom would put it into the same place. He would go into his computer settings, and then he would load it in on his machine. So the computer settings are a machine by machine basis, or installation by installation basis if you're doing it on a network. But once we've done that, we can go down on this list on the accounts preparation table. And on our accounts preparation table, against number 7, in this example, it may be a different, maybe number 8 or number 9, but generally it's around that sort of ballpark. On item number 7, audit report, we will now have a C icon, which will allow us to choose an alternative knowledge library. If this was a brand new file that hadn't already been worked on, the audit report we selected, because we made it the default, would automatically be loaded in. But because this is a file we've already worked on, we need to go to the C icon and we need to choose our custom report. As you can see, because I've loaded it into the computer settings, it is available on this list. Otherwise, I can select an alternative custom KL. If I select this, this will prompt me to replace the library file. I say yes to that. And then it will prompt me for an update. So you must always take an update to the audit report if you are loading in a custom report. So if you get loads of updates come through, you can deselect the rest, but you must take the update to the audit report. Otherwise, it won't update to include your new content. Once that's done, we double click on the document and we will see that loading in to our Caseware file. There we go. So this is where I was talking about the styles, the importance of setting that style up. You can see that that basis of opinion is not in bold because I didn't go through the process of changing the style, but the rest of the text does mirror what we would usually see within Caseware. You can see that our cells that we set up for Elstrom for the year-end date are also populating correctly from this file. Okay, what I'll do at this point is I will pass you back to Tom, because I know we've had a couple of questions come through. But yeah, that's generally the process of creating a custom audit report. Similarly with an accountant's report. But again, if there are any additional questions, please feel free to chuck them in. Tom, I will pass you back to you now.
Thanks very much, Phil. Yeah, we've got time just to squeeze a question in that's just coming off the back of the last segment where you were sharing, or the segment where you were sharing the report between different users. So for custom reports to work in a particular client file, I think, does everyone who opens those accounts on Caseware need to have the custom report on their computer, or is it enough that it exists only on the C drive of the person who created it?
Not everyone will need a copy of that custom report in their C drive to open the accounts. So if Tom opened the set that I've just worked on, he would be able to see that custom audit report. The only reason why I'd tend to pass it to Tom is if we needed to make any changes to it. Otherwise, the only person who'd be able to change it would be me. And then I would then need to obviously remove everyone else from the accounts. I would need to make the changes to the audit report, and then I would need to take an update to update the audit report to include the changes that I've made. But Tom would not need a copy of that to be able to see it in the accounts.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Phil. We are just about out of time, unfortunately, but if you want to submit any additional questions, it's not too late. The Q&A dialogue is still open, so if you wanted to use the feature there to submit your questions, we'll get back to you afterwards. We'll also pop it into the Q&A document. We'll upload to the help site. What we will do is just run through some very quick plugs so that you know where to go for your resources. As you probably have done for today, if you go to caseware.co.uk/events, you'll see our webinar schedule and some other event schedules as well. And you'll see our the agendas for those sessions, and you'll also be able to register to attend. On the next slide, we're just going to point you in the direction of our LinkedIn page and YouTube channel. Those are our client services, social media pages and channels where you'd be able to find all of our content on the YouTube channel for webinar recordings, quick vids, other video guidance. You can subscribe and do the usual YouTube thing there and set your notifications, so we'll let you know when new videos are available. And if you go to our LinkedIn page, again, client services, then we'll keep you up to date with the latest news within the business. We'll also let you know when we've got upcoming webinars and any upcoming key dates for releases, that kind of thing. So follow us there and you'll be kept up to date. And finally, on the next page, we have, on the next slide, we have help.caseware.co.uk, which is our a help site for all of our article written guidance in our articles, also including video guidance and recordings of webinars, including Q&A documents and any additional documentation with useful links and that kind of thing. You don't need a login to use the help site, just visit that address and just type in custom reports and you'll be able to find all the relevant guidance there. So that brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. Take care and we'll see you next time.